Always a great honor being on your show.
Well, last we spoke, you were in Islamabad for the negotiations, which we now failed. No, which we now know failed. It's at that point when we spoke, it was still unclear what exactly had transpired. So I was wondering, given the significance of the negotiations breaking down in terms of possibly, yeah, restarting the war, what do we know about what happened in Islamabad?
Well, before we went, I met people in the delegation at the airport, and also on the plane we spoke, and in the hotel before the negotiations we had different conversations, and it was clear that no one had any real expectations. The belief was that Netanyahu was the person in charge, and that the Zionist lobby was dictating terms to the United States government, and that the chances for any success were very slim. But Iran participated for two reasons. Just like before the 12th Day War, Iran knew there was going to be an attack. Just like before this war, Iran knew there would be attack, but it negotiated both to see if Trump uh, wanted an off ramp and all, but more importantly, to make sure that people across the world and Iranians recognize that Iran was attempting to uh, resolve the situation, so that no one could later blame Iran for not negotiating and thus causing or being also responsible for war. The same logic applied for this trip. There was They believed that the United States did not have the will to uh, make this successful uh, negotiating process, and but also Iran wants to make sure that everyone knew that we are willing to resolve the problem if the Americans are reasonable. So there were low expectations when the negotiations took place. From my understanding, during the day, there was progress on different issues. But near the end of the day, the United States suddenly shifted position and took a very hard line, especially with regards to the nuclear program and the enriched uranium that Iran has, and the status of the Strait of Hormuz. So when the talks broke, it was expected that the following morning there would be further talks. Then later we saw Vance walk away, claim Iran wants to build a nuclear weapon, which of course Joe Kent in his resignation letter, uh, being the highest ranking counterintelligence officer in the United States and a Trump appointee, rejected. So obviously he wasn't telling the truth. And also saying that Iran didn't accept our demands. So of course Iran won't accept demands. Wasn't the side that lost the war, but and those demands violate Iran's sovereignty anyway. But I think what came out from the negotiations was clear for the Iranians that Vance had no mandate, because Dr. Ghalibaf, the Speaker of Parliament, who's also an associate professor at my university, he he had extensive conversation with Ayatollah Khamenei, Seyed Khamenei, and he had a mandate. He negotiated. He did not call Tehran during the talks, but Vance was constantly on the phone. And one of the people who he spoke to was Netanyahu. And as we know, Netanyahu himself said that Vance reports to me, and so do other American officials. Every day they report to me, which I find extraordinary, that he can talk like this and no one in the United States and the U.S. media or the U.S. government show any outrage. Basically, Netanyahu is saying, I'm the boss. And so it's clear that Netanyahu will not allow an agreement to be achieved, and thus he is pushing the world towards a great economic catastrophe. And we also saw that when the ceasefire was agreed upon, because Lebanon was a part of the ceasefire. So Netanyahu, and Trump all conspired to wreck the ceasefire. And so even then, it was Netanyahu who was pushing Trump. And that's what forced Iran not to abide by its commitments. As soon as Netanyahu made it clear that they would not abide by the ceasefire in Lebanon, Iran continued to block those extra ships that were supposed to be going through the Strait of Hormuz as a result of the ceasefire agreement. So Netanyahu, for the last few days since the ceasefire, he's been impeding any easing of the global economic crisis, and he's making it worse faster. And then now, of course, by imposing the blockade himself, Trump is quickening the pace of global economic collapse. So this is basically where we are. By the way, when we flew back, as we discussed last time, after the Washington Post piece, the opinion piece, where it was advocating that they murder that the United States and the Israelis murder the negotiators, we of course all thought that the chances that our plane would be shot down were very high. So the Iranians flew us basically into Iran, but immediately landed near the Afghanistan and Turkmenistan border in the city of Mashhad, a very second largest Iranian city. And from there, we drove to Tehran, which is about 1,000. Well, I took a train, but some drove, some took cars, some took buses, and I and others took a train. It's about I guess 1,000 kilometers roughly. So we came by land, but it's quite extraordinary that the Washington Post, U.S. media, the Fifth Estate would now be advocating crimes against humanity in this way, competing with the most ugly of the Zionist, killers in politics. But that's where we are today.
So also the ceasefire isn't really working, and but nonetheless, there's discussions now or talk about extending it. On the other hand, Trump is saying he doesn't necessarily want it extended, so it's hard to say what is happening. But we also have the U.S. blockade now, as you said, on Iranian ports, which can't help but to think that a key target of this would be China, given that the vast majority of this oil would be heading to China. How successful is the blockade so far, though, on Iran? And what do you think? How durable is it in terms of and the consequences it will have?
It's hard to say because the blockade has only just begun. I think it'll take a couple more days to figure out what's happening. I think that it's going to make the global economic crisis worse, and it's going to turn more countries against the United States because, for example, as you rightly point out, the Chinese are very angry. The Americans are basically dictating terms to China and saying that you cannot have oil and that you cannot do trade and that you're not allowed to enter this part of the world. And we've already seen that happen in Venezuela. And now it's clear that the Americans want to strangle the Chinese through controlling the means of energy. But it's a double-edged sword because simultaneously he's intensifying the global economic crisis. And for U.S. allies who are much more vulnerable than China, this is going to be catastrophic, and the catastrophe is going to happen earlier, sooner, quicker, because now nothing, or at least the plan is to have nothing leave the Strait of Hormuz. Iranians have also, by the way, as I'm sure you know, said that they will, if this blockade continues, they'll start striking ships in the Red Sea, and they'll block the Red Sea and the Gulf of Oman. That will make things even worse because the Saudis are now exporting, I guess, roughly 4 million barrels a day from the Red Sea. And of course, trade goes through the Red Sea. But in addition to that, as the Iranians escalate and as the world goes towards crisis, the Iranians don't have a shortage of money right now because the Iranians have been putting aside a lot of money during the last few years, especially in gold. But also the Iranians have made a lot of money during the past few months, ever since the United States began increasing its presence in the region, and then during the war. Iran has been selling its oil at a much higher price, without middlemen, without discounts. And Iran also had 200 million barrels of oil on the seas, and it sold about half of it now. And it still has another 100 million barrels, which it will probably sell within a few weeks. And that's a huge amount of money. That's itself, I guess, 2 months of Iranian exports of oil. So, but it does indicate how little oil is left on the market. Extra oil is all disappearing. Russian oil on the seas was not as much as Iran, but they also had oil in tankers on the sea. They've finished all of that. They've sold theirs. Iran has sold half of its oil. So, this just shows how bad the situation is going to be shortly with regards to all energy related items and helium and energy related commodities. And this is when the factories run out of helium and run out of LNG, and when agriculture faces a crisis because of a shortage of fertilizer and all that, I think then we're going to see dramatic change. At the moment, from what I'm hearing from people who understand politics far better than I, is that this is the tip of the iceberg, and that we're moving very swiftly to a turning point where things will go downhill very fast. And Trump is intensifying the speed towards which we are moving in that direction.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think going into a global economic crisis as a consequence of this, it's often pointed out that even if the war would come to an end today and everything would flow freely, still the lack of fertilizers now will have some massive repercussions on the food prices, which would then again spread the conflict further. But besides the economic aspect, what do you see the possibility now of the United States going back into the same high intensity war against Iran? Or because I wasn't sure how to interpret the blockade. On one hand, it looks like it could be an effort of escalation control. We put a blockade on your ports, you don't respond, and it could be more favorable to the high intensity conflict where the Americans might be running out of interceptor missiles and losing a lot of planes. But at the same time, the Americans are moving a lot of military hardware into the region, it seems, troops as well. How do you assess it, though? I mean, as a threat, how do you see the capabilities and the willingness of the United States to go back to this high intensity fighting?
Well, the Iranians are expecting a major assault, and they are preparing day and night. And they too, like the Americans and the Israelis, are rearming and reorganizing and preparing defenses and preparing offensive capabilities. So Iran does not, doesn't see the negotiations as necessarily serious at all, and that most probably the Americans are buying time. The Iranians are naive, as I said before. Before the 12-day war, many thought Iran was caught off guard. Iran wasn't caught off guard. Iran had to negotiate for the sake of its own, so that its own people, first and foremost, would see that we tried. Because if we did not negotiate and the U.S. would assault, Western media, which like the Washington Post, which is right now calling for the assassination of negotiators, they would be the first to say, well, if the Iranians had negotiated, we wouldn't be where we are. They're never going to blame the aggressor. They're going to blame the victim. And then a part of Iranian global public opinion would be affected, but most importantly, Iranian public opinion, part of it would be affected. If we want to make sure everyone is on board. And that was true about the 40-day war, the Ramadan war. And that's true now. So the Iranians are going to definitely continue engaging with negotiators, but Iran's not naive. And as we saw, when the Israeli regime began hammering Lebanon, Iran cut off, it stopped its side of the bargain. It said, well, nothing is going to leave the Strait. What we promised to do to increase the number of ships going through the Strait of Hormuz, that stops. So ultimately, by violating the ceasefire, the United States is hurting itself more than it's hurting Iran. The Israeli regime is hurting the global economy more than it's hurting Iran or Hezbollah. And by doing that, the Israeli regime is being viewed across the world as the reason for global misery and the rising hardship that we're seeing across the world. So after 2.5 years of genocide and now genocide in Lebanon, they're going to be blamed across the world. So Iran wants to make sure that it is seen as trying to solve the problem and that people see that it is Netanyahu and Zionism that is pushing the world towards economic catastrophe. So Iran is preparing itself for war. But every day that goes by where we have a ceasefire, this is putting more pressure on Trump because the global economic crisis is approaching. Now, we don't believe that Trump will disobey Zionists. The Zionists, they're the ones in charge. They're in control. And so is Netanyahu through the Zionists. The only way in which we can bring about change is to put so much pressure on Trump, economic pressure, that he is forced, or the U.S. government is forced, or some Zionists in the United States are forced to prioritize America over Israel. In other words, to make it so painful that they say, no, we cannot continue listening to Netanyahu. The cost has gone the cost is too high. But still, we believe that there will be a war. We believe that there will be a land invasion. There will be a massive attack on Iran, a massive act of aggression, and there will be propaganda talking, and from Trump's opponents and supporters, all of them will say how great, successful it was. They've captured here, they've captured there. Perhaps a couple of ships will, quietly or quickly pass through the Strait of Hormuz, and they'll announce some sort of victory. But it's not going to work. The Iranians are prepared. They're preparing further, and they will strike back. They'll destroy the facilities in the Persian Gulf, the oil and gas infrastructure, and everything else that's necessary on the other side of the Persian Gulf, and in a bigger way than last time around. As we saw during the last day of the war, Iran hit very, very hard. But there's also another element here, Glenn, and that is that we're approaching we're leaving. This is the end of spring. When the United States invaded Iraq in 2003, and when it attacked Iraqi forces in Kuwait, those were carried out well before mid-April. And they were during the cool weather. In the next 4 weeks or so, the weather goes up very much. Then we enter that hot season. So you'll have sandstorms in the Arabian Peninsula. You'll have great humidity, and it will be very hot. Fighting under those conditions is very difficult. I have experience of that because during Saddam's war against Iran, I did fight in the south in the summer, and you can barely do anything during the day. You can, it's very difficult. So I think that American troops will not be able to perform well and under such difficult circumstances. And the damage done to American hardware, military hardware, will increase because of the humidity, the heat, and the sandstorms. I just don't see any opportunity. And the Iranians, just as they prepared themselves for over 20 years, for well over 2 decades, and we've discussed this together for years. Everyone can go back. All the things that have happened, we've predicted before the war. Just as Iran prepared itself, and it has a huge missile and drone capacity. And when the war starts, you'll see Iran hammering them day after day after day again, 24 hours a day, both the Israelis and the Americans and the proxies in the region. But they've also prepared themselves for an American invasion. They haven't just prepared themselves for an American airstrike or an American air attack. They prepared themselves for a land invasion. So do the Americans really think that they'll just walk in and do what they want? They've already failed in their operation to steal Iran's enriched uranium. They will definitely fail on the battlefield. So the weather is no longer appropriate. It's sort of like winter in Ukraine, if not worse. The summer in the Arabian Peninsula is. And then imagine if there is war, then if they started striking Iranian targets or Iranian infrastructure, and we start targeting infrastructure on the other side of the Persian Gulf, if we strike their electricity in this weather, in the weather that we're going to have in the weeks ahead, everyone will have to leave. The Persian Gulf, these Arab regimes, the weather there is good for, let's say, 6 months a year, and terrible for 6 months, or good for 7 months, 6 months, something like that, and terrible for 5-6 months a year. So if Iran strikes their electricity, then everyone will have to leave, not over than like a week. Everyone will have to leave immediately. All of these regimes will immediately collapse, especially since they're, the elites in these countries are so well off that they cannot tolerate any form of hardship. Whereas in Iran, if they strike our electrical power plants, I mean, Tehran in the middle of summer, it would be warm. We'd be uncomfortable, but it's not there's no comparison. Right now, as you know, there's snow on the mountains to the north of Tehran. A lot of snow. It's last night when I was out, I had to wear a jacket. And with my jacket, a light jacket, I was so cold in central Tehran, not in the north where it's more mountainous. So it would be both very difficult for American soldiers, and if the two sides are striking one another, it would be the end of Kuwait, the Emirates, Qatar, and so on.
The land invasion, this sounds like a disaster. I mean, with such a large territory and also the limited troops on the US side, it doesn't seem like they have anything near the troop levels they would require. Also, planning a land invasion, it seems like something one should do prepare well for, especially for countries like Iran, which appears to, with its mountains and oceans, appears to be built like a fortress. It seems, well, it wouldn't be the first country I would want to invade. But how do you see the Gulf states' appetite, though, to return to this war? Because I get the impression there's some mixed feelings there. The UAE, they seem to be strangely optimistic, while others may be a bit more cautious. So how do you see the willingness to perhaps to take on a bigger role in the war against Iran if we go back into now a full-scale war again?
I think that's more or less how it is. It is the UAE that seems to be pushing for war, and probably the first country that will be eliminated. And the others are increasingly worried about the situation, including Saudi Arabia. But as I said, the Iranians, if there's war, that would mean that the UAE, it'll be finished. If Iran's infrastructure is destroyed, it'll be difficult. But if UAE's infrastructure is destroyed, it'll be the end. And it's a tiny country, and it can be destroyed very swiftly within a day. Um, they're they're arrogant. The arrogance of the ruling family and their reliance on Israel and the United States is extraordinary. I'm not sure, but I heard that the Emirates, their direct flights to the Israeli regime have once again been established. They stopped, I think, during the war. It's just they don't seem to recognize the amount of anger that exists in Iran among Iranians towards that regime. It is enormous. And when they did on the last day after the ceasefire strike Iran hit them much, much harder in return. So, yeah, except for them, though, everyone else wants an end to this. But I don't think I don't think that's going to happen. I think the Americans are preparing for a major assault on Iran, and the Iranians are preparing. They've been preparing for many, many years. And now they're just putting the final touches on whatever it is they have. And they're working 24 hours a day to prepare for the next phase. And as I said, in my opinion, some may disagree, time is on Iran's side because we're approaching summer. It makes those regimes more vulnerable. It makes life more American soldiers more difficult. But the global economy is a ticking time bomb. And every day that the Strait of Hormuz is closed, it intensifies the crisis. Countries put more pressure on Trump. Internal politicians in the United States, American people, put more pressure on the Trump regime, and the possibility that U.S. national interests, which are completely at odds with Zionist interests, I consider the Israeli regime to be the enemy of the American people. But the divergence will become so great. This is the calculation here, that it will become so great that the elites which are bound to Israel will have to make a decision to pursue a different route.
This is the last question. What do you think a victory could look like? Because both Iran, it's what it wants to achieve is essentially to push back the heavy military, the American military presence, which has been built up quite powerfully, and all the economic architecture built up with it. And it's a difficult thing to achieve. Also, given that the Americans aren't, I can't imagine they were going down, without, possibly even using a nuclear weapon if they have too great of a humiliation. Meanwhile, it's not clear. Well, I think the U.S. victory would be, I guess, defined by regime change and balkanizing Syria, perhaps not balkanizing Iran.
Right.
Yeah, sorry. But how do you see this, though? What would the victory look like?
Well, it depends. I mean, ultimately, victory, the final victory would be ending at this ethno-supremacism in Palestine, ending the genocide, in Lebanon too. The Israelis are slaughtering families day and night out of rage and anger that the resistance is effective. So they take it out on women and children. But that would be the real victory. But at this stage, I think what Iran would define as victory is the United States backing down and the Iranians preserving their rights, and Iran's allies in the region having protection, no longer being attacked. Long-term ceasefire, let's say. But also, I think that the Iranians' victory will mean that Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz permanently. And it didn't have to be this way. Iran had ambition to control the Strait of Hormuz. But the Americans started this war, and its proxies in the region, Qatar, Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Kuwait, were all involved. Jordan, were all involved. And so that's the price they pay. So the Iranians, in order to make sure that this never happens again, this war of aggression never happens again, it believes it has to control the Strait of Hormuz, and also to receive compensation. This is a means of doing it. So sovereignty, the Strait of Hormuz, and peace and quiet for its allies across the region. Iran didn't start the war. Iran at no stage escalated. Even now that Iran said it's going to, if this siege on the Strait of Hormuz continues, it will respond by blocking the Red Sea and Bab al-Mandab and the Sea of Oman. This is, Iran is saying this and plans to do it in response to the U.S. siege. And Iran refraining from allowing more ships to leave pass through the Strait of Hormuz and leave the Persian Gulf is in response to the violation of the ceasefire agreement, where the Israelis have been slaughtering the people of Lebanon in violation of the agreement. And during the war itself, it was always the escalation began on the American side, the Israeli side, and then Iran would retaliate. So Iran struck, let's say, energy infrastructure in the Persian Gulf, oil and gas, after Iran's infrastructure was targeted. So, Iran doesn't want this, but ultimately I think that a victory would mean sovereignty, control over the Strait of Hormuz, and peace for people in Lebanon, Gaza, Iraq, and Yemen.
Well, it seems like a big ask, but if you look at the shift in the world order, the one that was organized for the past decades around the US hegemony, and how it's rapidly shifting towards a multipolar system, it's not as if the world isn't changing at an incredible rate already. So it looks as if Iran's going to probably exit this war in a stronger position. I know there's been a lot of deaths and destruction in Iran, but the wider distribution of power, the geopolitics of it appears to be possibly coming in Iran's favor. If so, this would go down as one of America's worst wars, greatest disasters, compared to Iraq or Afghanistan or Libya or any of the other. That this is this is going to be a massive disaster, it seems, for the empire. But perhaps if it incentivizes the US to instead focus on rebuilding the republic instead of the empire, perhaps everyone benefits at the end. So
absolutely,
absolutely.
I mean, if someone actually came and said that I really want to be American first, I think the entire world would welcome that.
Well, thank you for taking the time and sharing your insights.
Thank you for having me, Glenn. Great honor.
बाप जाने मौला जाने कितने साल छोड़ा मैं चम चम तारों में तुम्हारे पीरे साथी छोड़ा मैं चम चम तारों में सोने दिया तारा वो पीछे पर बाबुल बने बने देवे में मार में चमे चमे अल्लाह जाने मौला जाने कितने साल छोड़ा में चमे चमे तुम्हारे पाप दादी थोड़ा में छम छम हेलो 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 चेक चेक हेलो 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 चेक हेलो 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 काट हेलो हेलो चेक हेलो 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 चेक
अरे क्यों चढ़े सारा यार इतने दे यार उतर जाओ सारा स्टेज का सारा थले उतरो नामांगा फिर चाहिए
जी तम इसके ऊपर बैठेगा तार मिसिंग करे ना हल्ले लगो बैठ दे तम एक बार ओए पीछे जाओ ओए बच्चा बाहर आ जाओ बाहर जाओ चलो 10 बार बाहर जाओ 2 मिनट में खेले एक बार बाहर नहीं चलो नशा बार पीछे आ जाओ बैठो चलो उधर जाओ तार मिसिंग करे मेरा लगती बार बार इसमें तार मिसिंग का हाथ थोड़ी हरकत देखनी है मिस्टेक हुई ना एनु मोल्डिंग वाला फिर मेरा हाथ है ना मोल्डिंग थोड़ा दी थोड़ा ना किसको बेस